Hello, I'm Shane May, and my topic is the death penalty and is it an effective deterrence for murder? Does the death penalty have a significant deterrence effect on serial killings and other murders? Or does it not make a significant difference in the overall murder rate? So I'm going to make a little bit of a bold claim here and say we've all seen like NCIS and any crime-based drama like Criminal Minds, and we were wondering why such criminals commit these crimes when there's laws that prevent this, and we have acts such as the death penalty to scare them away from committing these murders. So does so one of my personal thoughts is, does the death penalty actually have a deterrence effect? So I spent hours researching this and cross-referencing sources I found online. I went into some of the TRC database, and I'm going to give you a comprehensive and accurate overview of this complex issue. The effectiveness of the death penalty as a deterrence to murder is influenced by a range of factors, including societal, economic conditions, law enforcement strategies, and individual motives. And a comprehensive analysis of these factors is necessary to understand its impact on homicide rates. The death penalty is a controversial topic that sparks really heated debates. And does it serve as an effective deterrence to murder? Or is it just a symbol of punishment without significant impact on crime rates? Through a comprehensive analysis of some historical data and statistical trends and ethical considerations, I'll explore these complexities of the death penalty's deterrence effect on serial killers and other murders, and examine the factors that are influence on the overall homicide rate. I'm going to give you a brief little history of the death penalty so you understand what we're working with here as we come through this. The death penalty, by definition, is the punishment of the execution administered to somebody legally convicted of a capital crime. Throughout history, the death penalty has been used extensively in the United States, particularly through like the 18th century and the 19th century, and many of these states had arbitrary capital crimes, meaning, oh no, he killed my cat, I gotta hang him, or instead of, he murdered someone, burn him, right? So later in the 19th century, there was a reform movement on the death penalty, and some states abolished the death penalty, and others kind of changed what deemed a capital crime. So instead of, so he threw my cat outside, it's now he murdered someone. Like, that's kind of the reform. It was just changing the laws around. And some notable cases of this was a 1972 court case with Furman versus Georgia. The death penalty was deemed unconstitutional. It was kind of unconstitutional for 4 years, so from like 1972 to 1976, because 1976 there was another case, Gregg versus Georgia again, holding that new system of capital punishment was constitutional. So since the modern era, there has been 1,600 people, men and women, have been executed in the United States from 1970s all the way to now, though it's significantly declined over the past 2 decades. Since the reduction, of those sentenced to the death penalty has decreased, does that mean it serves as an effective deterrence for murder? Well, considering the death penalty as a deterrence to murder, I thought a statistical analysis would make the most sense. So, between like 1972 and 1976, as I previously mentioned, the death penalty was unconstitutional, and the average murders was like 19,600. In contrast, 2019, when the death penalty is considered more constitutional after a reform, the number of the death penalties was 16,400 something, and a decrease of over 3,000 or 15.5% over nearly 4 decades. This could suggest a correlation between the death penalty and the decrease in murder, but statistics alone wasn't enough to make this a conclusive statement. So I wanted to take into account the actions that deem a homicide. This could be anything from gang violence, domestic or reckless driving. And if the death penalty is going to be an effective deterrent against murder and serial killings, for instance, I wanted to take an unbiased take. A 2024 CDC statistic says 19,600 out of like 2,500 homicides are committed were firearm homicides. That's a lot of firearm homicides, and as I previously mentioned, this could be any of those homicide subcategories. And of all these homicide serial killings, 1%, just 1 measly percent. And this was in like 1970, it peaked at the highest of 286 confirmed killings, and as late as 2010, 42 killings per year. 2010, only 42 a year, and barely contributing to the overall homicide rate, though it can be argued that recent technology innovations are probably a reason for this, as well as like new forensic technology that helps us find these criminals. So that may be a bigger deterrence than the death penalty itself. And on further analysis, I'm gonna be honest, it's just the modern era that made it much more of a deterrence than the death penalty. It's technology. And while the death penalty may have a potential deterrence effect, according to like that 3,000 less deaths, less murders, the ethical implications cannot be ignored. Some ethical considerations are the death penalty has kind of a racial bias, and with the death penalty, which is disproportionately applied to people of color, which raises concerns about racial bias discrimination. Like with Troy Davis, was an African American man convicted of murdering a officer in Savannah, Georgia, in like 1989. He was on death row till like 2011 when he was officially executed, and then many witnesses later recanted their claims, and they were coerced into making those false statements. So who knows, he couldn't have murdered him. And there is also a risk of murdering an innocent person with the death penalty, which is a grave ethical concern. This could instigate like non-foundational evidence and like bribery, so staging crimes and such. My final point is the deterrence. Is it being an effective deterrence to murder? Some people, it doesn't scare them at all because some crimes are committed in the heat of passion, and they're not thinking that, oh, I'm gonna go to jail, I'm gonna be lethally injected, I'm gonna be gassed. A lot of crimes are committed in the heat of passion, so there's not always a deterrence effect. Like 10% of homicides and assaults nationwide are due to drug abuse, and they're not really thinking whenever they're under the influence. And some people are like mentally impaired. Think like Sloth from the Goonies. They accidentally kill someone, or if anyone's familiar with Mice and Men, it's accidental murders too, and they don't comprehend that. And while ethics are like a crucial point of the death penalty, personal motives of serial killings, more specifically, and the correlation between killings and the death penalty must also be considered. Serial killers have personal motives, and taking that into account, serial killers' statistical analysis can become a little challenging. Some such motives are thrill-seeking, sexual gratification, and psychological and emotional issues. The risk can be a sort of pleasure for like thrill killers, meaning the death penalty being a deterrent is out of the question. It's more of an incentive for them. They enjoy that chase. And then thrill killers crave euphoric and adrenaline rushes provided by stalking and capturing their victims, so death penalty doesn't really matter to them. And then thrill killers often are perfectionists with narcissistic personalities, and it can drive them to pursue their goals of a perfect murder. So, death penalty don't really work on thrill killers. And some serial killers may be motivated by sexual gratification and may use their victims for sexual purposes. Like Jeffrey Dahmer was a homosexual man, and he targeted only men. He had like a total of like 15 confirmed killings according to the FBI, and then he enjoyed his victims. And then Ted Bundy confessed to like 30 killings of women, which he killed for sexual gratification, and he committed necrophilia on them. On a darker note, John Wayne Gacy was convicted of killing like 33 men and young boys, and that was all for his sexual gratification. He'd like take young vulnerable boys, gratify himself, and kill them. It was horrible. And there's a long correlation between psychological and emotional issues with serial killing, because you must think it takes a monster to take a life, which it does take a monster. Like, some of them have, like, antisocial personality disorders. Like, it's just a condition that's emphasized by the lack of empathy or impulsivity, like, and it disregards the rights of others, so they don't really care. And many serial killers have ASPD. Like, environmental factors for serial killings often have a history of, like, societal and economic factors that contribute to their behavior, such as poverty, neglect, and abuse at home when they were younger. While the deterrent effects of the death penalty can be debated to have some bearing on serial killings, other capital crimes the playing field and compromising of societal and economic personal factors are so complex as it brings such policies into questions, and a nuanced examination will thus require like an analysis at like at several levels, including like an ethical implication, statistical analysis, and like individual motives in order to outline a way which impacts homicide rates. Although the deterrence effect of the death penalty can be argued to a certain small scale, such as effectivity if preventing serial killing or other such capital crimes, is ultimately significantly curtailed by ethical issues and racial biases and innocence and personal motives, which raises even more suspicions that other forms of justice may be better at reducing the death penalty. Homicide rate, not the death, sorry. They may be better at reducing the homicide rates. Death penalty is honestly doesn't seem to be too effective as a deterrence, though you can't ignore some statistics saying it being lower ever since the reinstatement of it. Thank you for listening.